Hey everybody, it's Stephanie Ward of fireflycoaching.com, and I'm super excited to be here today with Eldridge Labijno. Welcome.
Thank you.
Before we dive in, I want to read his bio because it's phenomenal, and there's so much more than this. This is the very short version, so I encourage you to visit his website and read more, and we'll share that link later. But just to start off for now, after a successful international career as a neoclassical ballet dancer, you all know I love ballet, Eldridge retrained for 10 years to become a theater director and master coach of strategic interventions. Based in the Netherlands, he works around Europe giving workshops for startup accelerators, universities, cultural institutions, and businesses, and as an external communications consultant for people who aspire to public office in the UK. He's also one of 3 statutory directors of the Dance and Creative Wellness Foundation. We're so glad to have you here.
Yay!
Yay! So it's really interesting because when I reached out to ask Eldridge if he would be on the podcast, he's like, well, yeah, it sounds interesting, but I'm not really that into marketing. And I said, I know, that's why I want you to be on the podcast, because you have created such a successful business without really focusing on marketing. So I'd love it if you would tell us how you've done that.
Yeah, I'd love to. Absolutely, it was fantastic. And we had this conversation just before we started, and you were telling me that your definition of marketing was connecting.
Yes.
And I think connection is one of those things that everybody wants. We all want to feel connected. We all want to have interest and attention. And it's fantastic when you feel that you're connecting with other people and you're vibing. And that's what I work at. So if that's your definition of marketing, then I'm a marketeer.
Okay, so maybe you could tell us, like, very on practical terms, like, what does that look like for you? Is this something that you consciously think about on a daily basis, weekly basis? Do you have any metrics or numbers or ways that you manage your process? Or is it super organic?
It's super organic. It's all synchronicity. So what comes on my path and interests me and resonates with me and normally connects or interests or resonates with somebody else. And then that energy just takes its own form. And sometimes it means that 2-3 years later, somebody calls you up out of the blue and they say, look, I wanted to work with you for ages, but I didn't have the project and now I do. Yeah. Can we connect?
I love that.
That's how it works. So, and just on a practical level, because I know you want to make it very practical for the people watching, what I really can advise people is when you work with a client and you've enjoyed the experience and you've given them a lot of value, I often say to those clients, do you know anybody else who would appreciate this kind of service?
Yeah.
And most of the time, they pass your number on to somebody, and it's all word of mouth for me.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you've just said, because many people, I mean, everyone talks about referrals, asking for referrals, getting referrals. It's one of the best ways to build any business. And sometimes people get stuck with the whole asking part. They're like, oh, I feel nervous, or I'm afraid to ask, or how do you ask? So maybe can you share, like, do you do it in person? Do you do it with email? Do you prepare them so they feel this question coming? Or how do you actually handle asking for referrals?
Yeah, normally I would do it in person. I rarely do it on email. I don't do much email.
I love that. Like, I don't do marketing. I don't do social media. I don't do emails. I love it.
Yeah. This was one of the things about the last period. It's like, you know, everybody was at home. Everybody was doing their thing online, and I didn't have an online presence. So you were asking me about my website, and I was like, yeah, well, I guess I felt like I had to do one. So that's the first time I've had a website dedicated to me. And it's interesting to go through that process of, you know, defining the value proposition that you have and putting that on paper. And I do actually, this is probably another tip, I tell people, because I do a lot with public speaking, as you know, and I do say to people, have your first 30 seconds like down, you know, like if you wake up in the middle of the night, you'd be like, hi, my name's Eldridge, and I work with people like you so you can feel at your best while presenting your idea or your company in the best possible way.
Wow,
You
that's
know?
you got yours down clearly. So
Yeah, and then you can tailor it, right?
mhm.
But that process of being able to do that with public speaking and with keynotes, you need to be able to do that on paper, and you need to do that for your website. So that was like a nice, it was an interesting challenge for me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent tip to refine it and be able to adapt your message quickly when you need to. I also love that you, just to be clear, like when he says he just has a website, he's been successful for decades without one, which is another phenomenal thing about Eldridge. But building a website, yeah, it really forces you to get clear about what is it we think we do, right? And communicating your message. Have you had any, have you noticed any difference since you've had the website, or have you been sharing it a lot, or is it just more there to support you?
Yeah, I would say the last.
Mm.
It's there as a support. What tends to happen is that people come to me through word of mouth.
Right.
So
They're
they're not, they're not interested in a website.
No.
But what can happen is that people go to the website when they know they're going to work with me. So I work with, right. So then they'll have a look maybe. But that's not what they don't come back to me and say, hey, we really like, you're like one of the first people who likes my website, who told me that. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Love that. Okay, so just going back to something you said when we first started off, and you said you were open and you listen for and look for ideas and things that you connect with. Does that entail like specific websites or books or groups? Like, where do you go for your inspiration, or where do you float around to connect with these people? Are you you're not really you're on LinkedIn, but you're not busy there. So how do you make these synchronistic connections?
Most of the time, it's things that have come up either through reading or watching something online, listening to a podcast, and having a conversation with somebody and realizing that you have mutual interest, and then going into that. And in a work-related sense, my field is kind of niche. So you're pretty well known when you're good at something within that niche. Yeah.
So that's what you just said. There is a very important marketing principle, is it's much easier to grow faster when you're in a smaller niche, because everyone knows you, and then the word spreads around and you become that person in that group. So that's a brilliant move that you made without even trying. Just becoming well known in that. I know you have such an interesting perspective on so many different topics, but do you have any recommended podcast websites, people that you would like to share with us to help us open up our minds, or to develop our own leadership skills, or any favorite ways that you have to trigger new thoughts or new connections? I know you're a brilliant mind, so I'm going to try to unlock it. If you can share let a little of that leak out for us.
Yeah. So just before we had like our pre-podcast chat, and we were talking about meaningfulness and meaningpreneurs.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mentioned this guy, David Graeber, who wrote a book called, he was an anthropologist, and he wrote a book called Bullshit Jobs. And he also wrote a really good book, which was called Debt, the First 5,000 Years, which I can definitely recommend, because it will give you a different perspective on finance and money.
Oh, okay. Fascinating.
And money, yeah, fascinating. And money is a thing that people tend to get hung up on. So in this book about bullshit jobs, the punchline is half of people in our society think their job is bullshit, which is, like I said to you before, it's really sad. And I always consider my work as having value because it solves people's problems. And when their problems are solved, you can see something going out of their body, like a relaxation comes into them, and then they're able to step up and do public speaking or feel confident in leadership. And all of those things they just give me personally a sense of contribution.
Mm.
And I think that contribution rolls into growth.
Mm-hmm.
And it rolls into growth also financially because I get more clients through that work. But it rolls into growth because I realized for myself that I've been able to hit an aspect that they were missing, and then I can analyze that. You know, I can see how that would work with other clients. So it's less theory, more artistry.
I love that so much because everything you're describing is everything you're doing and describing is leading from the position of listening and supporting and solving. It's not like, okay, I need 10 new clients at 30K and that's going to be, you know, millions. Like, you're not, this whole discussion, I'm so happy you brought up the money and the finances, because people can get too focused on that and then they get crazy from it. And you're saying if you follow that thread and see it as artistry, it's coming. It's just coming around this way. It's not, you know, it's not the main focus. Did I get that sort of right?
I think you got that sort of right. You know, there is a point about artists being poor, right? So you do need to have a client of mine really early on when I started doing this stuff. And, you know, I was a dancer, and then I moved into theater. One thing rolled into the other. But a very early client of mine, who's still a client after all these years, he said to me, Eldridge, can I give you a tip? And he said, I'm going to hate it, but I have to tell you this. You're too cheap.
Okay.
You didn't price yourself right. For
Mm-hmm.
your service, you have to charge at least double what you're charging me.
Fantastic.
So I said to him, you know what this means, right?
Yes.
I'm going to send you a new invoice.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. But he was bang on. So you do need to price yourself right. But like I've also said to you once, you know, if your product is good enough, you should also be able to give it away. Which a lot of people is like, brain freeze. You know? Yeah, it's confusing, right? But the point is that if you give something away, what we tend to have is nobody turns up. Or there are people who turn up because it's for free. So when I do something because I feel like it's valuable and I just want to do it for a community or for a group because I feel some kind of connection with that group or that community, that is rewarding in itself. And also on top of that, it actually does turn eventually into clientele.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that because you're doing it because for the love of it, the value, the connection. And you know that, like you said before, it's not immediate always. It could be 3 years later, someone calls you and says, oh, I was at that workshop and now I have this huge project I want to offer you. So it's a part of knowing that there's give and take and returning value and bringing value. I think that's amazing and very powerful. I also love what you said, because it's a bit, so there's two things. They're focusing on the money that you want to earn, which, you know, I'm not against making money. There's nothing, that's not what I was saying. It's more about the focus on it. But what you were talking about that your friend told you is make sure you're valuing your services well and seek input. And if you get input, take it, because sometimes we do undervalue what we're doing because it feels easy or easeful and natural. So we think, well, if I can do this, everyone can. But that's the thing. That's your brilliance. That's your gift. And that's the thing you should charge the most for, actually.
Yeah. And nobody can do what you can do.
Right.
Right? Because nobody's you.
I love that. Nobody can do what you, that's such a great, that's a practical tip, right? Thank you. Yes. Brilliant. Okay. Do you have any last pieces of wisdom you'd love to share with us about marketing your business, running a business, being a business owner that you want us to take away? And then I've got one last question after that.
So with connection, because we made this, for me, this kind of like definition, with connection, I always bring value. So if I'm on a call and somebody's like, yeah, I heard about you, I'd love to work with you, or, you know, I was suggested that I talk to you, then I listen to my client or I listen to the person on the phone, And I work through with them what the problem is. And I have a definition of a problem, which is an undesired state, right? And it breaks into 3 parts. What do I have that I don't want? What do I not have that I do want? What do I have but I want more of?
Wow.
And once I've worked out with the person I'm talking to what their problem is, and then I define it like that in some form, and I say, okay, what do you want more of? And they tell me, or what do you have that you don't want? And they tell me. Then immediately they know, there's something here.
Wow.
And because I've been able to bring it up, and then I give them the answer. If I have it, I give them the answer. You know, it's not like, I don't even feel like it's mine to have then, you know. Once it's come up and I've shared it with them, have you thought about this? Or what other situations have you had that are similar, but you managed to work it out? You know, I had one client, at the time it wasn't my client, right? I had one person who said to me that they were very nervous about interviews, and especially like film interviews. Recorded, not so bad on down the line, the voice, but film interviews, very nervous. So we were talking about public speaking. And I said, well, how did you feel when you were first doing public speaking? And they were like, oh yeah, super nervous. So then we did like a role play, right? This is before they were my client. We did a role play that they phoned themselves about how they feel now and told their younger self how they would feel about public speaking. And it was like, you know, you're going to love it and you're so good at it and people love what you say and people really like, you know, they resonate with what you have to say. And then we did it the other way around. So my client, who wasn't my client at the time, got a phone call from the future self telling themselves exactly the same. But now instead of about public speaking, it's about doing interviews, you know? So we just worked that out on the spot. And then that was like, you know, really a great, and still is a great client. And they're the head of an organization with 1.5 million members.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, you know, that was like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And like tons of work.
Yes, and I will say that it was 15 minutes. You know, it's the whole Picasso thing. But you spent, you know, 20 years preparing those 15 minutes, and also that you thought so carefully about it, and that you approach it with not what can I get, but what can I give, and what a difference that makes. And this is the second time you've mentioned a client, a very long-term client. So obviously it's working, and they're sticking around. So you have given us so many amazing tips. Thank you so much. I've got one last question for you. Which is, what is your favorite part, or what do you love the most about being a meaningpreneur?
Right. So this idea of meaning is so intrinsic in us, right? And it's one of those things that, for me, it comes back down to being of service. And when I can provide and be of service, then that is meaningful. And that gives the meaning, because I've helped somebody or I've been part of somebody's journey, which has resulted in them going forward. And that has taken me also forward in my journey. So I think that's, for me, if anything, that's the meaningpreneur essence of being on a journey together with others and being able to support each other in that journey. I
love that. I like that you said it's a journey about being together and being connected, and it's not, you know, all me, and it's about us and give, again, you giving first. So many wonderful pieces of wisdom there that you've shared with us. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to have information where you can find Eldridge with links, and where you can read more about him, hire him, talk to him. He's absolutely fascinating. I can attest to that. Always sharing wonderful, inspiring ideas. So thank you so much, Eldridge, for sharing with us today. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Okay. We'll catch you next time. Thanks so much for listening. And if you have questions, let us know. Bye.